We are recording this.
And only ask dumb questions.
So we can only ask dumb questions, exactly. And expect smart answers as well. So, well, thank you one and all for coming. My name is Brian Bear. I'm the Regional Program Coordinator for Architecture for Humanity. Hurricane Reconstruction, we're based out of New York City, an extension of our headquarters, which is based in San Francisco. Tonight's training is for all of you who have so generously selected and elected to donate your time for our Resilience for Education Design Center program, which we are launching for our first instance in Seaside Heights, New Jersey. We have representatives Ken and Melissa from the Building and Zoning Department from the Borough of Seaside Heights joining us. We have one of our partners, Peter Crawford from Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group. I want to thank our sponsors, NTV Viacom, for the funds that are providing us for this wonderful program. And I also really like to thank Toms River Regional Schools for allowing us to use their media center. So with that, what we're going to do is go through the program real quickly. Well, not real quickly. It should take about an hour, hour and a quarter to go through the information. As it's a relatively small group, if we need to take a break along the way, we will do so. But I'm thinking we can just go through the information. And we are going to make the video available to everyone. We are going to make the PowerPoint available to everyone so they can use it for reference. For those of you who have signed up, thank you. If you haven't signed up for a shift yet, like we used to do in the olden days of voting, early and often is the preferred. So a little bit about Architecture for Humanity. We are a 15-year young organization using the power of design to better lives globally. Our network of field offices ranges from our headquarters in San Francisco to New York to Haiti to Bogota to Johannesburg to Tokyo. And we have 56 chapters worldwide. Closest one is our friends in Newark. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. We have a chapter in New York, which is one of our largest, a chapter in Philadelphia, and I think there's about 18 here in the United States, maybe a little bit north of that. And then the balance are global: Europe, Asia, Africa, so on and so forth. One of our partners in this process is the Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group. I'll invite Peter up here real quickly to talk a little bit about their organization. Peter?
Hi, my name is Pete Crawford. I'm from the Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group. I'm the Assistant Disaster Case Manager Coordinator. And I wanted to come here today to speak to you about the process, what the DCMs do, or the Disaster Case Manager, in order to help people get their unmet needs fulfilled in recovery from the storm. And so the biggest part of our process is doing the vetting. So once someone's been assigned a Disaster Case Manager, we go through a checklist and ask people to give us copies of a lot of their personal information to ensure that they're sustainable and that they're their primary home and they were affected by Sandy. We do an initial assessment, which is kind of like an application during an intake meeting, and we get a lot of the information about where they were during the storm, what they've done so far, what they received from their insurance companies, grants, and try to paint a picture of what their unmet needs are, so we come up with a disaster recovery plan. And so we collect, before we can refer anyone to any resources, we have to collect their proof of income. So we got to get their 2013 income tax return. We collect their pay stubs and 3 bank statements of all their bank accounts. We also request from FEMA what's called a DOB, or duplication of benefits, and that shows us what they received from FEMA so far. And we try to make sure that we're avoiding duplicating the benefits so our money can spread out and help everyone get back to them. We also collect letters from their SBA, the Small Business Administration, whether they were denied or approved for a loan. We collect their insurance, proof of loss, their settlement, what they received from insurance, we have to pretty much collect all receipts that we can. We have to show that the money was used appropriately, that they had from their insurance. And so our disaster case manager is sitting there with calculators, going through each receipt, page after page, make sure that it was spent wisely. And then we connect them to resources in the community, like Architect for Humanity, or there's Habitat for Humanity, all kinds of resources out there, whether it's for mental health, food, clothing, construction is the biggest, obviously. And then we take what we couldn't find with the community resources and take them towards our unmet needs table. And so our unmet needs table is a group that meets every Wednesday, and it's a table of different funders that essentially has volunteer resources, financial resources to help with what their unmet needs are. And so we also fill out a form to present for them, which we're encouraging disaster case managers to take with them to the clinic, so that it really paints a picture of what they received, what they have left in the bank, and how much their cost is estimated to be to get back home. Their rental costs currently, it shows you everything. And so that's what they'll be encouraged to bring with them. The case managers are going to be encouraged to come with the clients to the clinic to assist in any way that they can help you guys get connected to them. They'll be able to provide a lot of information, and they'll have a release signed and can give you verification of the information that you need when you request it.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Peter. So some of the part of our process that we've been going through over the last few weeks is preparing for the design clinic. Meeting with Peter, meeting with all of you. We've done a couple of presentations around the area already. Our next step, obviously, is to train or retain and educate the volunteer design professionals such as yourselves. So thank you very much for coming. Identify and register the property owners. So similar to the process that you folks have gone through in registering yourselves as volunteers, we have a similar online program, very simple for the clients or the disaster case managers to go through and register the property owners. Name, street address, size of building, whether or not they have plans, are they receiving any funds from other sources such as insurance or family and friends or an SBA loan, what type of assistance that they need. So all of this information is going to be gathered, and when they are assigned a time to come in, or if they come in off the streets, you will be able to see all of that information live on the screen, ready to go. So that information has already been vetted, if you will. And your process will be to ask questions, listen very closely, and then come up with an appropriate solution for them. So at the end of their time with the clinic, whether it's a half an hour or an hour and a half, they will receive free pro bono, which is redundant, design advice that they can take to a design professional. Or once we go through the clinic, ourselves and Ocean County Long-Term Recovery Group will be using some criteria to select a few candidates to go through a design and construction process. And that will be the first phase of our work. We're in the process of gaining funding for future construction projects, and hopefully that'll be coming in not too short while. Construction and obviously the ribbon cutting, which I think we talked about with our partners. People are going to be coming with little gift baskets and that's event. So what are we going to really be gaining out of this in terms of community goals? Well, it's to elevate the knowledge really of not just the homeowners, but of you folks to design smartly, and we'll get into what that means in a little bit. The program goal is to serve a vulnerable population, seniors, disabled, veterans, low-income, single-income families, provide a means for those wanting to help with the recovery efforts to do so, develop a needs case, identify the most prominent recovery design issues for that particular neighborhood, and develop innovative design solutions. So that's really where you guys and gals come in, is the innovative design solutions. You're really going to be able to flex those design muscles in providing interesting and innovative design solutions for the community of Seaside Heights. And there's going to be a variety. Some will be, most I think will be single-story bungalows. There will be some multi-story facilities. I know that OCLTRG has reached out to their one of their colleagues at FEMA for the commercial side of it, so we may see some commercial clients coming in. So it'll be an interesting pool of information. So what does smartly mean? Well, smart design is sustainable, it's mitigation, it's adaptation, it's resiliency, and it's timeless. A lot of people in our profession struggle with what sustainability means in terms of green buildings, and even more have a tough time identifying what resilience means. So at the end of the day, what does it really mean? Well, it really means designing a building smart. So that's the idea. Along with this, we want to talk a little bit about climate change, because it's not just about a storm, the right here, right now, but it's planning for the future. It's that T, it's that timeless. We want to make sure that the buildings that we are solving, for the problems that we are solving for, is generational. It's not just a 5 or 10 year fix. It's a 40 or 50 year fix. And you hear the people talking about climate change. You know, it's sea level rise, and how do we deal with that? It's not just maybe 1 foot of freeboard, but it might be 2 or 3 feet of freeboard. And we'll get into what freeboard means in a little bit. But the images on the screen right now, the lower left-hand one was the Sandy inundation of this particular region. So everything that is in blue was inundated by the storm surge from Sandy. And it goes in pretty far. If you look at the upper right with 1 foot of sea level rise, you can see the blue area is the effect. And the lower right with 2 feet of sea level rise is an even greater effect. So how do we deal with that with our design solutions? So that's something that I challenge you folks to think about when you're talking to the clients and the design firm. Everyone, I think, knows what FEMA is, and this is as of May 30th, 2014, just the various disbursements of what FEMA has provided this area since Sandy struck. Just close to $430 million dispersed through the individual assistance program to over 260,000 people. Almost $1.2 billion in assistance to state and local governments. Another 280 towards the hazard mitigation program for infrastructure. So, and we're not done by any stretch of the imagination. NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program. One of the things that we are going to be requesting, if not necessarily requiring, I think we're going to have a long conversation with our partners about the projects that we take on, is you build a residence, we reconstruct it, guess what? We're going to ask that you are sustainable and provide yourself with flood insurance. We don't want to have to come back, a year, 2, 3, 5 years from now and have to worry about a project that we've taken on that doesn't have any insurance. We want to make sure that the building is sustainable, that the client can afford flood insurance, that they can afford their building. Just some quick little facts about how the NFIP treated Sandy. Authorized payments right away up to $30,000 for initial building repairs. Think rapid repair program in New York City. Those $30,000 hits. A lot of it came to roof repair, window door replacement, infrastructure, boiler, water heater, electrical upgrades. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, New Jersey just closed on the 1 year. Ken, correct me if I'm wrong. New Jersey closed the door on submission for that first year not too long ago.
They basically closed everything now.
Okay.
I don't think there's any other grant right now.
Correct.
Unless they change it, then reopen.
Correct. Thank you. So FEMA timeline on just some firm maps. Firm is how NFIP rates properties within a flood zone. The last preliminary flood insurance rate map was issued in March of 2014, so a few months ago, and they're looking at closing the door on that and making them final official around this time next year. And this is what a preliminary firm map looks like. You can find this on Coastal 2 through FEMA. Might be a little tough to see in the slide, but this is Seaside Heights, Seaside Park, and Levelette to the north, with Route 37 Causeway cutting through the sort of middle of that slide. Close up, Seaside Heights is broken up into a few zones. V is right along the beach, then X, then AE, which is predominantly in the middle, and then another X zone right by the Route 37 interchange. So how do you find your BFE? Well, you go to the region2coastal.com website. You go to Get Preliminary Firm, which is a drop-down menu, and just a little sidebar, all of this will be available to you at the design clinic. Each team will have a laptop. You'll have access to all of this information. Make it nice and simple. So a client comes up to you and they say, I don't know what my BFE is. So you can plug in their address. In this particular case, we plugged in Borough Hall at Seaside Heights, and up comes the information. At the bottom, the BFE is elevation 7, zone 8. So you can go through and get further details. This is a little bit more of a detailed map of the various areas. Again, firm maps are broken into a number of areas. V, which is tidal, usually right on the ocean. Coastal Zone A, a little bit more inboard. AE, farther in, and then X is limited. So we talked a little bit about freeboard. That freeboard area is, so you have a base flood elevation, which is what is recommended for your bottom living area. And then you have a design flood elevation, which is usually base flood plus your freeboard. Sometimes it's 1 foot, sometimes it's 3 feet. In Seaside Heights, it's recommended as 1. Although with climate change, we are recommending anywhere from 3 to 5, depending on the neighborhood. Just a couple of glossary items. So the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, talked about the special flood hazard areas. Again, V, A, AE, and X. We talked a little bit about base flood elevation, right? Design flood elevation, that term freeboard. Again, at the bottom, right now we're recommending an additional 2 feet. So it's 1 foot right now, plus an additional 2 feet within Seaside Heights, which would be 3 feet in total, to accommodate predicted sea level rises for 2050, which is still all within our generation. SISD, substantial improvement, substantial damage. Anything north of 50% damaged of a building would be considered substantial damage, which means that you need to make a substantial improvement, which means that you need to follow the current building code, New Jersey State Building Code. Anything that is less than 50%, it is considered a rehabilitation. Although we are encouraging even those property owners who have less than substantial damage to take into consideration, serious consideration, the current building code. Wet floodproofing and dry floodproofing are two pretty important terms to understand. Wet floodproofing is predominantly used for residential structures, which allows floodwaters to pass underneath or through the building. And we'll get into a couple of diagrams of what that looks like. And dry floodproofing is kind of the opposite of that. It prevents the water from getting into that building. We'll get into some slides about that. Dry floodproofing is predominantly used for commercial or mixed-use structures. And I'll explain why. Zone A, Zone B, Coastal A, and Zone X are defined here. And just how we're going to be talking about the FEMA structure. So we have the FEMA flood maps, then the New Jersey State Building Code, and then the seaside heights zoning and building code. So that's sort of the hierarchy that we're talking about. That's the hierarchy that we'll be talking to the clients about, all while making the building smart. So, Seaside Heights, Zone V, as you can see in the dark color on the slide, is predominantly the beach, the boardwalk. Ken, remind me, does that go inboard to that first row of commercial spaces?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That would be Zone X, the first commercial street. Yeah. So within Zone V, pre-firm map, pre-sanding, if you will. These were the requirements for rehabilitation, a lateral addition, a vertical addition, or a foundation repair. Nowadays, in a coastal Zone V, everything must comply with the current building code. Period. Straight up. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Zone A, as you can see, most of the Seaside Heights is Zone A. And within Zone A, the design and construction and lowest flood elevation must meet at or above the BFE. Again, we're going to be talking about coastal mitigation with climate change. It's that DFE plus another 2, or BFE plus 3. And then Zone X, again, interchange around 37, and then the predominant zone of commercial spaces running along. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of that street.
Ocean Terrace.
Ocean Terrace, thank you. Just a quick little requirements overview. Zone A, lowest floor, including the basement, is elevated to the BFE. Enclosures below that building must have flood openings. I'll show you some examples of what that looks like in a little bit. Non-residential buildings may be dry flood-proofed. In Zone B, dry floodproofing is not allowed for non-residential buildings. New buildings must be located landward and reached on the tide. Residential in all zones must be elevated above BFE. So what does that look like for a commercial building? Excuse me. Well, if you are elevated or wet flood-proof, the slide to the right, or the image to the left, excuse me, the image to the left is elevated or wet flood-proof, which allows the water to pass through. Ken, do we have any buildings in Seaside Heights that are commercial and are elevated?
No.
to anything off of it. So in most cases, if we see a commercial client coming in, what we're probably going to be suggesting is either A, if they can afford it, to wet floodproof, or dry floodproof to above the BFE or BFE plus 3, if we're talking about climate change. And in some cases, that could be the head height of the door. In other cases, that could be waist height. I think it's really just going to be dependent upon where that design flood elevation is really running. So what does that look like in sketching terms? Well, the image on the right kind of shows that. It's a bracket around that door or around that storefront window with a flood mitigation louver at it. It is deployed in the event of an event, usually by a human. I haven't seen too many automatic protection, but they do exist. And then when the event subsides, those come out, and you have access. Now, the kicker on this is going to be maintaining appropriate egress out of that space in the event someone's still in that commercial space with the floodgates deployed. So it's something that we'll need to wrap our arms around and come up with a reasonable design solution. Most building codes have structural occupancy categories 1, 2, 3, 4. The majority of the ones that you will be dealing with fall under Category 2. Category 1 are low hazards to human life, such as agricultural or storage buildings, temporary structures, that sort of thing. Category 3s, substantial hazard to human life, such as schools, healthcare facilities, buildings with an occupancy of 300 or greater. Lastly, Category 4 are essential facilities, including emergency facilities, fire and police, hospitals with an ER or an OR, water treatment power plants, toxic material handling facilities, aviation control, national defense centers. Again, we're going to be dealing predominantly with structural occupancy category 2. This categorization can be found throughout the New Jersey State Building Code. Section 16 structural has this predominantly. This can be found from the ICC as well. So this is coastal high hazard areas, Zone A, and coastal Zone B, and coastal area Zone A. So all buildings other than structures except those listed in categories 1, 3, and 4. You can see in the chart flood zone area A is BFE plus 1 foot, or the DFE, whichever is greater. Again, we're talking about BFE plus 3. We're talking about climate change. Orientation of the structure, if it's parallel, is 1 foot, is BFE plus 1 foot, or BFE plus 3. And orientation perpendicular is BFE plus 2 feet. So a little bit difference there. Commercial zone B, again, the chart straight from the ICC. This is section 1604 of the New York State Building Code, but it's not too different in New Jersey. It's the same criteria, essentially. Flood-resistant materials, we want to make sure that our projects that we are proposing are resistant. They are sustainable, and they are, again, timeless. So we want to make sure that whatever materials that we are using will stand up to the test of time. We are not going to be doing something made out of asbestos for obvious reasons. We are going to be using substantial materials that meet the building code, that can get behind and Excuse me, Gil, can you take up on that minutes?
Hello. My name is Gail Gambarini, and I'm the Regional Project Coordinator for Architecture for Humanity. We're going to be looking at commercial A zones. So, in a commercial A zone, in a commercial A zone, you have to dry flood-proof your building up to the BFE. Some are going to ask, why can't I elevate my commercial building? You must elevate your commercial building in a B zone, but not in an A zone. If we remember back to the slides on that actually showed the flood zones for Seaside Heights, a majority of the community falls within that A zone. So there will be some commercial structures in the center of the community that actually will fall under this category that might come in and be your client. You don't need to elevate. You need to dry flood-proof up to that BFE line. And these are some examples of different ways of modifying that storefront elevation to the relationship to the street and how you can accommodate. So, for example, where you need to, the FRCE is the flood-resistant construction elevation. That is where everything below it is within that BFE. So everything below it needs to be flood-resistant construction materials. It needs to be considered breakaway walls if you require them. And there are going to be other aspects. So, for example, if you want to put plantings, instead of just having constant breakaway walls, you can put in some plantings to accommodate for that constant street scene because commercial structures interact with the sidewalk around them. This condition is going to be rare in Seaside Heights. However, if you do come across a commercial structure that wants to elevate their interior floor and has to accommodate for how to get into that new elevation, you can either place the ramp on the outside, assuming the building envelope and the site allow for that with the setbacks, or you can place the elevated ramp and access on the interior, which I believe is the next slide. Yes, it is. So there are certain, when you look inside this diagram, you can see the finished floor is at that flood-resistant construction elevation, and the access to get into it is just on the inside of the building, keeping the aesthetic the same on the street. Utilities. Utilities within a dry flood-proof enclosure should be protected. Let's just put it at that. First off, if your utilities are below the BFE and you are a commercial structure, dry flood-proof them. If your utilities are in a residential structure and they're below the BFE, elevate them. But the point is your utilities have to be protected. You cannot keep your utilities and your mechanical equipment below the base flood elevation. So you have to either bring them up and keep them protected, or you have to enclose them and encapsulate them and keep them protected. Mixed-use buildings. So this condition, again, I don't believe is going to be that prevalent in Seaside Heights. You might run across a few. Most importantly with mixed-use buildings are treated the way commercial structures are treated. So mixed-use building in an A zone or an AE zone does not necessarily need to be elevated, but again, you need to dry flood-proof up to that BFE line. If it's mixed use and it does have that commercial aspect on that first floor, then that commercial aspect has several approaches. So if your client comes in and wants to keep the commercial aspect, you can talk about dry floodproofing and floodgates. You can talk about elevating slightly. If they're only off by a marginal number to hit the BFE, you can talk about elevating the height of the floor, assuming that the ceiling height provides for it. If the client decides that they want to abandon the commercial on the first floor, then they can turn that commercial on the first floor into, they can open up the walls and turn it into parking. So you can open it all up essentially, strengthen the structure, and provide parking, assuming that you enforce the underside of the structure, because one thing a lot of people forget is that when you're putting cars underneath buildings and cars tend to float, they're going to damage the underside of the structure. One thing you cannot do is that person who owns that mixed-use building and it's commercial on the first floor cannot trade out that first floor for residential. That is not going to happen. It's either they can keep their commercial aspects and we can protect it, or we can abandon the commercial aspects. Depending on the height of the existing structure, they might ask to abandon the first floor and build additional stories on top. That goes into the zoning code. I believe the zoning code for commercial structures was 40 feet in Seaside Heights. So depending on that existing height of the building, that is something that might be addressed during your consultation. However, one important thing to note is that this is an existing structure that you're talking about adding levels onto. So always recommend that they need to have a structural engineer do an evaluation on the existing property, because it might not be strong enough to actually take on those new loads. Do you want to jump back into
Sure.
residential?
Better now, thank you. Okay. Sorry about that. Frog in my throat. So again, going back to the two classifications of reconstruction for residential properties, anything less than 50% is considered a rehabilitation and falls into the New Jersey State Rehabilitation Code. Anything north of that, we're talking about substantial damage and must meet the current New Jersey State Building Code, which is essentially elevation. Yes, sir?
Okay, for questions?
Absolutely.
You have a commercial building with residents above it.
So it's mixed use.
Mixed use.
Yep.
Size of the first floor. That would not be substantially damaged. The entire building. Where do you take each of the uses separately?
That's a great question.
You can keep it all under one block, so it's a total use on one property. You guys can set it up any way you want. That's how we look at it. I'm trying to. We take the whole property. You're correct. The whole thing, not
Right.
just one part.
Yeah.
So presumably be a rehabilitation at that point, because it has to be under 50%.
It all depends what was in that first floor. You know, the cost of that reconditioning.
So you're taking the whole building.
I take the whole building.
Right. So that cutoff is for the whole value of the building. So in a mixed-use structure, you've got zero damage on the upper floor. It's worth $1 million, let's say, and it's got zero damage on the upper 3 floors, but it's got $550,000 of damage on the first floor. Guess what? You're 55% damaged. Which I think is how FEMA looks at it as well. It's the value of the property. It's not the value of the pieces, parts of it. So just some quick diagrams of what floodproofing would look like. In this particular case, you know, the walls are breakaway. The insulation is above that gap. There is a clear gap within the wall, so the bottom half of that wall can be taken off pretty easily, but the upper half still meets the energy code. However, this is limited to A, or AE, not so much in the V, right? Because in the V, bringing it up. Obviously, the building must be properly anchored. Unless we're actually making a houseboat, and then that's okay. That's a whole different thing. But 99.9% of the properties that we're talking about here in Seaside Heights are affixed to terra firma. The top of the lowest floor must be elevated to or above the required design flood elevation. So again, BFE +1 or BFE +3. Basements are not permitted. And we actually walked by a couple of structures last week that had a few basements that we were kind of scratching our heads about how did they fare, and probably
On the board one?
no, these were
Bayside.
they were Bayside. Yeah, they were Bayside. Interesting. We'll talk offline about that. Construction cannot increase flood levels in the surrounding community. So when we're talking about residential land, you know, we don't want the neighbor to be affected negatively by what you're doing on your properties. Communities may allow wet floodproofing without variance. This comes directly from FEMA. Enclosed areas that are below the BFE are solely used for parking, building access, or limited storage. They must be allowed to design for the automatic entry and exit of floodwaters. So on and so forth. Garages must allow for the automatic entry of floodwaters. Openings required in the exterior walls of the garage or the garage doors must be constructed with flood-resistant materials. I see a lot of brick in Seaside Heights future.
Yes.
Residential in a B zone, again, this table is taken right from the New Jersey State Building Code. But again, you can see category 2 for parallel, it's the DFE equals the BFE. Perpendicular is the same.
Ron?
Yep.
I'm going to ask a quick question.
You may.
You said it's in the New Jersey code. The table up there says it's the New York City building code. New Jersey has a nasty habit of deleting sections out of code. I know a lot of which are the flood resistant construction one. Is this in New Jersey code or is it?
This is within chapter 16, which is structural.
16.
So yeah, it's the same table.
Okay.
Yeah. Conveniently, it's from the ICC, so pick your jurisdiction: Minnesota, Massachusetts, New Jersey.
No, New Jersey goes in and manually says we do not adopt this section, and you see that continuously throughout.
Yeah, yeah. But chapter 16,
Okay.
it still exists. Yeah. I can't remember in New York, it's Appendix G, which is the
New
flood
Jersey has
resistance.
to, but it actually says that we didn't adopt it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes, sir.
I'm sure B zone, if you're not substantially damaged in a B zone, can you rebuild?
Yeah.
As is?
We don't have those issues now. Everything in B zones, everything we built.
Yeah. Yeah. In Seaside Heights, most everything that was substantially damaged in the zone has been rebuilt. Yeah.
And elevated, that's
Eliminated basements or wasn't substantially damaged that we had.
Do you have any residents in the B zone?
2 way above.
Yeah.
For next year.
Yeah. Most of what you'll experience in Seaside Heights that's in the B zone is either boardwalk or commercial.
And the boardwalk is
And
above the
it's
BFE.
all rebuilt. Yeah, it's all rebuilt.
And the majority of stuff I believe that you'll be working on is going to be in the A.
Maybe a little in the X.
I think they'll go.
Okay.
There's very little damage to the X.
Yep.
Except for the north end.
Yep. So what does elevation look like? Well, a couple of diagrams. The one on the left shows the red dashed line as the 100-year still water flood level. The blue dashed line is the BFE, and that freeboard that we talked about earlier is the BFE +1 or BFE +3, or the design flood elevation. So that freeboard area is what it looks like when you elevate it. If you don't elevate it, this is the image on the right, is a crawl space with flood vents within that foundation wall. You will come across this pretty frequently, I would say. So what you may see now when you drive around is either a little window with a window well or a lot of nothing. And what we would encourage is eliminating the windows and changing them out for a true flood vent. Yes?
There's a section in the FEMA code, go back several years, that allowed you to design the foundation walls to stand out, so you did not have to put the flood vents in.
I am familiar with that. I believe that is still on the books, but you are limited to a certain percentage of perimeter of wall, and I want to say it's 50%.
It is 50%, yeah.
So if you think of a box, you know, the house as the box, 50% of that exterior foundation wall can be a solid wall, where the balance of it needs to be free flow. So however you want to shake that out.
But you can't build it as a structural wall that will hold the water.
No.
No.
No, because that goes back to the earlier comment, preventing water from diverting and potentially damaging a neighbor. You need to provide flood vents.
The flood vents just equalize the pressure. That just has nothing to do with the water going around that thing.
The way FEMA looks at it is the water's flowing through the structure and not stopping it.
Okay, I got
Yeah.
some of them crazy answer last time I did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We want to prove.
If you just wanted to add a note to that, if you do take the option to make 50% of your walls just regular standard construction, then the remaining 50% of the perimeter actually has to be open and free clear space or breakaway, so lattice or green screens or something.
I have a specific client, the water came 6 inches above his floor level. He had no flood vents, he had no vents at all in the crawl space. He had some capital equipment in the crawl space. The flood water came up and it went back down again, and it didn't flood the floor. He came across the floor and went down. Saved his entire hardwood floor. All he had to do was replace the mechanicals downstairs. If he had flood vents in there, he would have lost his entire floor and a lot of his walls. Just another interesting anomaly.
Yeah.
I'll pull that floor on.
Different types of foundations. We have pier footings, columns on a connected slab, and then piles. I don't know, is there a preferred version of this, or it's sort of on a come as you are, come up with dough and
You can go anywhere you want.
go any way you want, right? Just as long as it, as that first floor is at the DFE.
The cheapest way I've seen so far, they're coming in piles.
Okay, Yep. Yep.
Mostly in piles.
sure. Rehabbing, again, before is on the left. We have a base flood elevation. We want to elevate that, or suggest an elevation, or suggest that we're going to pump in some flood vents just to help mitigate that pressure a little bit. In a number of neighborhoods in New York, we have a lot of hydrostatic pressure because the place was built on a swamp. In other cases, it's just the pressure coming in. So again, we want to make sure that we're providing that information to the clientele so that they can make the most appropriate decision. Just an example of located in an A zone, pre-Sandy, the living area was on the first floor, then it got flooded out, and we want to make the recommendation that what's going to happen is you're going to go to the slide on the left. So you're going to take that living space, you're going to take all your mechanical space, you're going to put it up, and then the first floor, what used to be the first floor, will be unoccupied. Storage, parking, access to that first floor, so on and so forth. Again, just some typical foundations. We're not going to see too many of the basement construction. We'll have a fair amount of crawl space, possibly slab on grades, possibly piers. Probably more likely in the crawl space. I don't know about you professionals out there, but putting a building on fill in any condition, not so much. So we're not going to suggest that. Although in other locations around the country you can, not so much here. The other 4 options are certainly valid.
Unless you want to do the whole town.
unless we wanted to do the whole town. Not really in our budget right now. Not
That's
really in
a
our
great approach to climate change.
Yeah.
Elevate
Just-
everybody.
Pick it all up, man.
I said that to the mayor the first day. I was like, you know, on Herring Avenue, you get out.
You had to try.
A for effort, right? Just a couple of diagrams about foundation clips attaching the building to a foundation. Simpsons making a killing, or their like-minded competitors are making a killing. Text is a little bit small to read, but once we send this around to you folks, you'll be able to read it in greater detail.
Big expense.
Big expense, yep, but definitely worth it. Pile design, obviously you're going to engage with a client who's going to say, well, what about piles? Can I put my house on piles? Yes, you can, but we want to make sure that we say things like, well, we need a structural engineer, we need a geotechnical engineer so that we understand how many piles, size, the field, so on and so forth. Yes?
Good question for Seaside. What's the ground here? Do you have a lot of people? Can you,
More than we thought.
okay,
More than we thought. We thought we were all basically all sand, and other architects and engineers that haven't been working in the area came out and tested. Right next door with what other engineers are saying that it wasn't exactly what sand, it turned out to be beat.
Lowest floor elevations in residential, again, DFE, straight up. Do not pass go, do not collect $100. It's going to make your life a heck of a lot easier when you make that case to the client coming in, whether it's at the design clinic or in the future. Just say DFE, make it nice and simple. And then you can explain to them the process of elevating. And you can go through this 12-step description, which we will have available to you. It's lengthy. It's time-consuming. It's costly. But it provides a reasonable answer for the question of, okay, well, how much and how long is it going to take me to see my building elevated? Well, you can say this and multiply it to 2. And that's how many weeks, usually, it's going to take for the whole thing to happen, about 24 weeks, from start to finish. That's what my experience has been. I don't know, you've had a
Their
similar
program has 12.
12?
And when they'll get paid for the job.
Yep.
With the residential, what is the maximum zoning height allowed in Seaside Heights?
And the residential zone is going to be 40, and the LVR and the single-family zone is going to be 27 above the BFA.
So enough to get, a reasonably good-sized passenger vehicle underneath the house, and then 1 to 2 stories ish,
Really
depending
getting
on
the garage,
how high it is to that.
4 on 12-pitch roof, 3 on 12-pitch roof,
Yeah.
and you're right there.
Does Seaside Heights have a requirement for the roof pitch? Okay.
Nope.
That's fine, some towns do, so.
Yeah, I know.
That's one check.
Yeah, no,
Right.
we're simple. Don't lock it up either.
Just some diagrams on considerations of elevation. Obviously, height, access. Just to jump back in height on a second, there are 2 heights in Seaside Heights that you need to be familiar with: 27 feet for residential, 40 feet for non-residential. Right?
No. Residential is 40 foot. That's in the east side of town.
Okay, I'm
West side
sorry.
of town's the LDR and
Gotcha.
the single families.
Gotcha. All right. Sorry. Thank you.
we'll have a layout of that?
Yes.
We'll have a diagram of where people are within it.
Yeah, we'll have we will have the zoning map available. Access, obviously, how do you get people up from grade to that first floor that's 8, 9 feet above grade? Stairs, probably. Ramp, very long ramp. A lift or a LULA, limited use, limited access elevator. Sure. All ideas. Right? Obviously, the mechanical systems, they're going to go north of the BFE. They're not going to be below unless they're in a commercial space and you drive flood-proof back Parking below, well, you want to think about that a little bit. You don't want to make sure that the car is not going to float and bring the house up with it. So when that topic comes up, because I'm sure it will, we need to think about how we're going to approach that. Question? You could leave the car windows open and just let the, like a floodgate and let the flood waters go. Why the heck not? Sure, no, that's a great idea. That's great. And then ground floor use, again, we want to minimize ground floor use. Before and after pictures, you know, pretty true to life diagram of a single-story bungalow in Seaside Heights before, and then after you elevate it. So in this particular case, there's a large stair in the front, but the foundation wall has been or the building has been lifted up on piers probably and clad with some type of screen just to make it look a little bit nicer. Again, some before and after. In this particular case, they've abandoned the first floor and turned it into parking. Before and after for a two-story structure with and without the porch. Again, enclosures must be that are below the DFE must be wet flood-proofed, have limited use, reasonable solar parking, storage or access, automatic entry and exit of water. Again, some more diagrams of wet flood-proofing. The image on the left is of the flood vents within the existing foundation wall, essentially taking out a block, think of the CME block, popping it out, putting in some type of screening to prevent the critters from going in and camping out, making a home for themselves. B, in the image on the right, is a true house lifted up on a series of piers. I think that was part of our reconstruction post Katrina that we had done just outside of Biloxi. Just a quick little architectural drawing of that. Those of you who can't get away from what a stud looks like, right? Diagram, just some text on utilities. Again, residential utilities, everything north of the DFA or at the DFA. Nothing in the basement, nothing in the crawl space, nothing below.
Nothing higher than 6'6".
Nothing higher than 6'6".
Yeah, which would be to keep everyone for grade. That should keep it all above the DFA.
Okay. Really, even if you had your first floor at, let's say, 9 feet, your preference would be to have utilities. Fire. Got it.
Disconnect the meter and shut the power off the building without waiting for the electric company to come and pull the wires.
But the boiler or the water heater, that could be normal. It's just a disconnect.
Yes.
Okay. So you want to be able to jump up. Someone short, you want to be jumping. Right.
Grab that meter, right?
Grab that meter. Excellent. Storage tanks, not too many of them.
No, it's gone.
They're all gone.
You had one.
You had one. That's good. Well, but when we take this out of Seaside Heights, because I'm sure you're all going to want to do this over and over and over again with us, which would be great, there will be storage tanks, and whether it's a water storage tank or a fuel oil storage tank, this slide gives you some direction on how to deal with that. Not too many cesspools, although I would imagine there are some septic systems in the more rural areas that could be affected. Ducts and water heaters, again, design flood elevation. And then emergency power, which building systems require it. I'm sure you're going to get some clients that say, where do I put my generator? I would treat it very much like piece of mechanical equipment, put it above the base flood elevation. So just some specifics for the borough. As we've been talking about, LDRs are 27 feet for building higher than shall exceed 40 feet. The borough is trying to encourage off-street parking as much as we can, which would certainly help when the building is elevated. Is there a curb cut? I would imagine there's a curb cut requirement.
The application, they go up there, yeah.
Okay. And that's what the zoning map looks like, and we will provide a much larger version of this, full size to life at the design clinic for everybody to look at. But you can see with the ocean at the bottom of the page, LDR towards the bay, and those other nuances. Residential business. Any more questions?
I have something I'd like to add.
Sure.
So just stepping back to that Seaside Heights specific slide, one thing you are going to encounter are outdoor showers. It's a beach community. Outdoor showers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe outdoor showers, as long as they don't have hot water, they can stay below the BFE. The minute they add hot water, that's when you have to elevate that outdoor shower to above the BFE and DFE, like the habitable space. But if it's just a drain and it's cold water, you can keep it where it is. You can keep it down below the BFE.
No.
No.
You don't get a drain if it's just cold water.
That's
Any
right.
drain has to be above the FA.
Okay.
What's the definition of hot water?
If it's not the cold water side, it's hot water.
Warm water is not.
No, not allowed.
So, ask us questions, give us scenarios, pick our brains.
Washing and dryers are allowed in the garage. Yes, drain has to be above the BFA. If a dryer will pump 25 feet up. A washing machine, not a dryer. So that's allowed. And if that's considered a garage, is not covered by insurance anymore.
So we are looking to, again, host the design clinic at the community center on Bay Avenue Boulevard. If I said it right. Bay Boulevard. Sorry, I think it's San Francisco. Friday the 18th, Saturday the 19th, Sunday the 20th. All 3 days will be from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. We're hoping that we're going to have at least 50 people come through our doors, and we're going to divvy them up probably as equally as we possibly can. We have a fair number of volunteers, but always looking for more. And we can help all those that come through our door with some really great innovative solutions.
Are the clients coming through the door pre-scheduled for when they should be arriving at the clinic, or can they arrive anytime throughout the day as they feel comfortable?
We are hoping that the clients will be coming through on a predetermined time, or at a predetermined time, excuse me. So if they sign up for 1 p.m. on Friday, that they come in for 1 p.m. on Friday. A lot of our juggling act is going to be how many volunteers we have versus how many clients we have, and making sure that we can service everybody that's walking in through the door. So that's our hope.
That's not to say that some people will see our banner or hear news around town and just be a regular walk-in. We'll try to accommodate them as much as possible.
Both Lila and Mika have gone through our pilot program in New York. Lila did our Rockaway program, and Mika did our Red Hook program. last case, we get buried. Each one of us could take a case as well. But we're hoping to be busier than not. We really want to be able to help those people who are still struggling to figure out what it is that they're doing, because there are still a lot of people out there, not just in Seaside Heights, but in neighboring communities and around the tri-state area that are still scratching their heads, wondering what it is that we need to do to make our homes safer. I think Arthur, that just rolled up the coast, kind of gave everybody a reminder that the storms are here and they're not going away. So we want to make sure that we provide people with enough information, enough qualified information from folks like you that can answer those questions so that people can make those decisions. So, yes, sir.
The question I have is what's on the ground, where the peat levels are, and how thick they are, how deep they are, and what the foundation is going to be. Once it's above the ground, everything's pretty cut and dry. There's, what the options are.
Right.
But not knowing what's underneath and then having to spend $300 to $500 to have a soil boring done on each specific lot before you can take the next step, it's a real stumbling block, which I have with all of my clients.
Sure.
How to really go.
Sure.
Is there a map that kind of where the bad spots are? And
Right. That's a great question, though.
It has to be tested from one property to the next, to go from pilings to an existing foundation into bad timber.
Yeah.
So there really there's no map.
because I've done it where if I've got 3 or 4 feet of reasonable earth, before I hit a couple of feet of peat, I feel confident I can add on to that, and it's all going to kind of be okay.
Right.
But if I'm down less than that,
Right.
and with a deeper amount of peat, then it's like, man,
Yep.
you're kind of screwed. You have to go with some sort of tiling system, which gets cost prohibitive if it's a 1-story house.
Right. So to build on that a little bit, when you come in and you volunteer and you sit down with a client that says, all right, well, how do I deal with this? I think the approach that I would suggest you take is think of it as a big picture. Okay, we know we need to not just rehabilitate the home, but we need to extensively repair it, which is probably going to mean elevation. In order to do that, you're going to need to go through the steps, which means retaining a geotechnical engineer, a structural engineer, so on and so forth. And what you could do to help guide them to making that decision is just providing them with a sketch of what their house would look like if you were to put it up on piles, or if you were to put it up on 50% solid foundation, and give them the idea of, okay, if I do this, then this is sort of what the building is going to look like. And we certainly wouldn't want to get into the fine-tooth comb or the pitcher's mound for dollar value, but you can give a range. We did that with our clients that we saw in both Far Rockaway and Red Hook. The range of cost is X to Y. And we won't know what that is going to be until we actually get into doing the fine level of design for your particular home. And a lot of people haven't even gotten to that point yet. So just providing that level of information is going to be very valuable to them. Oh wow, my single-story bungalow looks like this. When I elevate it and put in the lattice work and the stair or the elevator lift, because I'm getting a little bit long in the tooth and I plan on dying here and bequeathing this to my grandkids, and now they can live here for the next 100 years. Here are the solutions. So you're giving them you're educating them, and that's going to go a long way. It's going to get them from being stuck to being unstuck and coming up with a really great idea of how I'm going to live in my home for the next 30 years and beyond.
And unfortunately, I'm looking at it, it's going to be, there's a possibility that you can do this and build
that's a decision that, you know, that's an option for them. Sure. Walking away is an option. For them.
However, walking away,
Whatever that
means.
whatever that means, sure, that's an option. But I think what we would want to do is give them the appropriate information so that they can get to that decision. That the decision is, okay, we're going to elevate it, we're going to put it on piles, it's going to cost, you know, X to Y. This is what it's going to look like. Is that something that you're willing to live with? Yes or no? Yes, no, or maybe. That's option A. Option B, you can make it look like this. Option C, you leave it alone and you do nothing and, you know, you move elsewhere.
Option C is take down your 500 square foot bungalow, which is cheaper to tear it down.
Right.
And build up.
And just build it new.
That's been a lot of the cases.
Right. Right.
But getting the people to make that decision in that step has been very difficult.
Right. Right. And that's really the first step of getting them in the door and understand and helping them really understand what the opportunities are. Because they're stuck in problem land. And what we want to do is just guide them along in those solutions.
Since the soil boring is so important, do you have a list that we could hand out of people that have worked in town?
The majority of the people that have been doing it is through the REM program. The REM program for the state of New Jersey, they're the ones who are really doing it. We have local architects and engineers who've been here forever, and they're saying it's fine. We can't question that. The house right next door, it's peatlands. The house doesn't. I don't make the call.
Right, if you have soil boring, that's what you can go by.
Can't require it.
Can you require it?
If you've been working in Seaside Heights for the last 30 years and you feel you have the knowledge of the land, the code book allows you to make that decision.
Oh, it runs okay.
Yes. I know. It's
My
on you.
first call is going to be to you. What do you say?
Yeah, well, again, this is about educating the general public. So we want to make sure that we are educating the general public.
What I'm getting to is if you get to that, then you need a soil boring. And they're going to ask me, well, who do I call?
Right.
Okay, I would say.
Yeah, if we have several names
Yep.
that they can contact, then
Yep.
Yeah. I think we can provide that level of information as part of the database as well.
Yeah, Ken, if you can get me that contact information, then I can disperse it to all the volunteers.
You'll have not just this PowerPoint presentation and the zoning maps and the building code, but there'll be a whole host of online resources that you'll be able to have access to during the clinic. So it's, you know, region2coastal.com to call up your firm. It'll be, you know, the Blue Book for qualified structure engineers in the region. That's a great resource that I've used to find engineers. So it's your own database. You know, you may find that you worked with someone that you want to recommend that isn't on our list, and you'll be able to plug them in there. So it's an interactive educational tool center. You know.
On the flip side, we're also asking that each DCM, disaster case manager, attend the consultation with their client. So these are DCMs that have been working with their clients for 2 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and they know the financial side and they know the emotional side. I don't want to tear down my bungalow even though it's cheaper because I'm attached to my bungalow. They have the other resources that you might need during that consultation. So between what we provide you and the technical information, the DCM being present, we should be able to provide, you know, a base consultation with all options available to that individual person, to that property owner, so then they can sit back and say, okay, now I know what my options are, now I know which one I would like to pursue because I understand them and I know what's going to happen.
Two quick questions. It sounds like you've been very thoughtful in what resources you're providing to us. Are there any resources that individuals or firms attending the meeting may benefit from bringing that might have been cost prohibitive that you couldn't give to us to start with?
If you have multiple editions of the current New Jersey State Building Code in paper version,
We don't have
Bring it.
Which I think we do have.
yeah, if you're coming and you have a building code at your your disposal, bring it.
Okay.
That would be helpful. While yes, it's available online, sometimes it's much easier, especially if you're a more seasoned architect, you can automatically go to Chapter 9 and look up X, Y, and Z much faster than someone with a great amount of computer experience and they're doing that movie. So something like that would be very helpful.
And then how should we handle questions pertaining to financing? It's great if we can sit there as architects and designers and say, we'll provide our services at this stage preliminarily and later in design and build on a pro bono basis. But from what it sounds like, these are old people that kind of fell through the cracks. So what happens when the disabled veteran who has no money to pay for any of this says, how am I supposed to pay for soils engineering reports? Where's the money coming from? Is that something the disaster case manager will cater to more than us? Should we have some basic answer to work with?
That's a very good question. The answer to that question is you'll direct them to one of the four of us at Architecture for Humanity, or to their disaster, or highlight it to their disaster case manager. That's not a decision for you folks to be making. So I don't want to put that pressure upon you. Your role is really to come up with the variety of design solutions. Who is going to be going through the first phase of design and reconstruction? Again, that's going to be between Architecture for Humanity and OCLTRG. We're going to be talking about that at great length. While we do have a set of criteria that we're going to be using to make the selections, you're going to be hearing stories as well, and we're going to be hearing the stories as well. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people who don't want to tell the story because it's painful to them, but they will tell you the story so that you understand their perspective. And that's okay. Feel free to engage with them to hear their story, because a lot of what we do is storytelling. A lot of what we do as architects is storytelling, because we're there to solve a problem at the end of the day. It's how we listen we come up with those solutions by listening to what our clients are telling us. So, yeah, but the financial end of it, that's us. We'll get that. Yeah.
So piggyback on the resource question that we have, anything we should be familiar with going in, we should look at anything you're going to give us before, besides links or information.
If you haven't participated in flood construction, I suggest that you just poke around on the Region to Coastal website, become familiar with how to use it. Become familiar with some of the zoning aspects particular to seaside heights, so you can get that from our PowerPoint. Other than that,
I would say the flood-resistant building code, but since it doesn't exist, really,
I mean, if you wanted to,
I would encourage you to read the ICC version of flood-resistant construction, because at least you'll have a familiarity of the terms and what the ICC is looking for and what FEMA is looking for. At the end of the day, Ken's got to live with it, and we want to make sure that the buildings that we are designing and leaving behind are going to stand the test of time. Again, it's designing smart. We want to make sure that we're designing smart. We don't want to be designing in a vacuum, because that does nobody any good, period. So let's be a little bit more proactive about that, and make sure that we have that ammunition in your arsenal.
the other suggestion I could make is brush up on your flood-resistant material knowledge. The more you know about what you can use, the more creative solutions you can come up with in your designs. So just brush up on that.
Any other questions?
Pick our brains, guys.
You You all have our email address and our phone numbers, so feel free throughout the week, this week, next week, to reach out to any one of us. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, folks from the borough. Thank you, Tom's River, for reviewing and hosting us. And again, thank you all for signing up. Appreciate it. Have a great evening. Safe travels all.